Hey guys, tonight we travel somewhere deeply unpleasant. You just woke up as a humble farmer during the Mongol conquests. Around the year 1240, the good news you're alive. The bad news are fleas, bandits, tax collectors, and possibly a Mongol scout party a few miles out. The air is damp, thick with the scent of wet straw, stale body odor, and the haunting aroma of last night's boiled turnip. A rooster screams outside. But not out of punctuality, it's just as miserable as you are. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake in darkness, not because it's too early, but because there's no window and no such thing as an alarm clock. You're lying in what historians politely call a single-room dwelling, which sounds cozy until you realize it contains your entire extended family. A goat, 2 chickens, and an ambitious rat who's taken over the corner with the least leaks. The roof is a patchwork of rotting thatch and divine hope. One hard rain and you'll wake up floating. The bed, a generous word. It's straw, barely dry, strewn over packed earth. Mold is your mattress topper, if you're lucky. Someone shook out the lice yesterday. If not, you're about to become their breakfast buffet. There's no blanket, just a worn wool tunic that smells like hard labor and 14th century regrets. Your legs are sore from yesterday's plowing, or from sleeping with them curled into a defensive ball to keep from brushing against your cousin's feet. You're 28 years old, your spine thinks you're 92. And the smell. Oh, the smell. Imagine if sweat, mildew, manure, and cabbage got locked in a sauna for a week. That's your room, that's your air. And it's not changing. Because bathing is an annual event if you're rich, and a myth if you're not. Personal hygiene is more of a suggestion than a practice. Your nose adjusted to it years ago. Anyone new who walks in, they'll pass out before saying hello. You sit up slowly, too fast, and your joints will protest like overworked peasants, which, fun fact, they are. Your feet sink into damp earth, and you try not to step on anything that's alive or wriggling. The family pig grunts at you, annoyed you disturbed his nap. You share this space with more mammals than you'd like. And not all of them are human. No windows means no sunrise. Your body tells you it's time to move, mostly because your bladder is having a one-sided conversation. You rub your eyes, blink into the dark, and mentally prepare to face your daily blend of labor, hunger, and the ever-looming anxiety that a Mongol scout might torch your village before lunchtime. Outside, there's no sound of galloping hooves yet, which is either a good sign or the silence before the screaming. You're in the vast territory where the Mongol Empire expands like spilled ink, relentless, formless, and uninterested in your personal schedule. Last week, someone said they saw smoke rising from a village 2 valleys over. You don't ask for updates. Hope is dangerous. So is information. Historians still argue whether rural farmers under Mongol control were treated better than those caught in the empire's path. Some say Mongol rule brought stability eventually. Others point out that stability is a cold comfort when it arrives 2 years after your home has been flattened and your neighbors relocated by sword. You creak to your feet, one day closer to another tax, one day further from your last real meal. Your fingers are stiff, your breath visible. The dirt floor has warped slightly overnight, so your first step almost breaks your ankle. You regain balance by grabbing a wooden beam that was once part of a church door, now serving as a ceiling prop. Recycling is medieval. It's still dark outside, but you shuffle toward the rickety door, which opens only if you lift and pull and pray. The hinges gave up around the same time your optimism did. Beyond the threshold, the field, the frost, and the faint glow of a sky that hasn't decided whether to rise. The wind slices through your tunic, reminding you that comfort is a rumor from the future. There's no such thing as central heating. Your home has the thermal properties of a damp sock. And there's no insulation, unless you count the hay stuffed between the wall slats, home to at least one family of spiders. You take a deep breath, immediately regretting it. Outside doesn't smell better, just different. Smoke from other huts' hearths mixes with livestock fumes and the subtle perfume of manure freshly flung. This is your world, muddy, smoky, pungent. You don't live in it so much as survive through it. And it's only the beginning of the day. You shuffle through the icy mud, your bare feet numbing by the second. There's a wooden bucket in one hand and a dull ache behind your eyes that feels older than time. The rooster continues its one-bird protest against existence. Somewhere in the gloom. You don't speak to it. You both know words won't help. Your first job is to fetch water from the stream. Calling it a stream is generous. It's more of a reluctant ditch, winding its way past the village like it. 2. Wants to leave. Carrying water is your pre-breakfast workout, assuming you don't slip and end up face first in something a cow left behind. The bucket is heavy on the way back, your hands stinging from the cold metal and the splash of water that's closer to ice than liquid. No one says good morning in your village. That phrase hasn't been invented yet, and even if it were, it wouldn't apply. Every morning is bad. What do you even say congratulations? You're still here. Most people died before 40. You're not old. But your spine, knees, and digestive system think otherwise. The Mongols haven't arrived this week, hooray. Celebration, except you're already behind on your grain tithe. And the tax collector arrives on horseback, which feels symbolic. You step back inside, and the warmth from the dying fire is insulting, just enough heat to remind you how cold the rest of the room is. Your wife's already up, stirring something in a pot that smells like defeat and yesterday's onions. It's not food so much as edible sludge. And it's supposed to keep you alive until nightfall. This is breakfast, and also lunch, and depending on how things go, possibly dinner too. You sip it, careful not to burn your tongue, not because of the heat, but because it's the only working part of your body left. The taste, imagine if vegetables had feelings and were deeply, deeply sad. Pottage, that's the name. It's less a dish and more a genre. Some days it's beans. Some days it's turnips. Today, it's mostly water and ambition. You glance around the hut, one of the kids is coughing again. You try not to notice, because noticing leads to fear, and fear leads to remembering that medicine hasn't quite figured out germs yet. The local healer recommends crushed beetles and chanting, or leeches, always leeches. The goat's trying to chew on a boot. The pig has rolled into the fireplace ashes. No one has shoes that match, and even if they did, the mud would win anyway. Hygiene is theoretical, and boots are prized possessions. You still mourn the left one you lost in the flood of 38. Outside again, the sun is finally dragging itself above the hills. Though calling it sunlight is generous, it's more like weak tea poured through fog. Time to begin your real work, tending to the fields. You don't own the land, of course. You work it for a feudal lord who may or may not remember your name, and definitely doesn't remember your existence unless you're late with taxes. Historians still argue whether life under the Mongol administrative system improved village stability. Some claim that, once conquered, the territories enjoyed streamlined taxation and a brutal kind of peace. Others note that taxes often doubled, and peace was what happened after your village had already been burned down. You pass other villagers on your way to the fields. No one speaks. What's there to say? Lovely plague this season. Hope we don't starve by June. Communication is mostly grunts and occasionally meaningful eye contact. You've all seen the same things: sick animals, fires, hunger, frostbite. No one's winning this game. Your hoe is a wooden stick with a bit of iron on the end, bent like it's trying to retire early. Farming tools haven't changed much in centuries because innovation requires free time, and nobody here has that. You dig into the soil, muscles complaining instantly. You haven't fully recovered from yesterday's digging, or the day before that, or last year. Women work beside you, often with infants strapped to their backs. Gender equality exists here, but only in the way that everyone suffers equally. Your wife harvested wheat while in labor once. The baby was born just after sundown, cleaned off with a cloth that previously dried onions. Kids chase chickens and mimic adults by pulling weeds or breaking sticks. Childhood ends around 5. If you can walk, you can work. If you can't walk, you're still expected to carry water. One boy broke his arm and came back to the field 3 days later. Using the other hand, no one clapped. There's no time for applause. You work until the sun is high. The midday break is optional. And you don't take it. The sooner you're done, the sooner you can get back to not having enough food in a slightly warmer hut. That's the dream. That's the reward. And the Mongols still not here, which feels almost suspicious. Now comes the part of your day that really tests your medieval resilience, relieving yourself. A surprisingly complex operation, despite involving absolutely no technology. Toilets, as you understand them from modern life, don't exist. There is no porcelain throne, no seat warmer, no button to flush. You do not go to the bathroom. You go outside and contemplate your life choices. The toilet is a special patch of land behind the hut, creatively referred to by locals as the back. It's a short walk, but one fraught with decisions. Do you bring a stick to wave off dogs? Should you wear your only shoes or accept frostbite if it's raining? The mud has its own plans for your balance and dignity. Some families have a wooden bucket with a lid. Fancy. Yours doesn't. You squat, you suffer, you move on. And here's where it gets fun. The entire village basically participates in what can only be described as an ongoing social experiment in waste disposal. The streets not for walking, more like open-air sewage canals. People toss their waste directly into the paths between homes. There's a special shout. They use some version of Gardeloo or mind the muck. Depending on which side of Europe you're on, you learn to keep your ears sharp and your reflexes sharper. Historians still argue whether these practices were ritualized for efficiency or just evolved from centuries of collective apathy. What's clear is that cities reeked like latrines and countryside villages were only slightly better by virtue of having more wind. If you're lucky enough to be near a larger town, you might spot a public latrine. These are not helpful. Picture a shed hanging over a creek with some planks and a terrifying drop. They are, quite literally, holes in the public trust. There's no toilet paper. You clean yourself with moss, straw, or your left hand reserved forever after for no touching. Social etiquette is shaped by bowel movements. The noble class has slightly better options. Wooden commodes with padded seats, emptied by servants who are either paid well or dead inside. But let's be honest, nobility is still pooping into buckets. It's just a bucket with a crest on it. You return home feeling not better, exactly, but emptier. The pigs don't notice your brief existential detour. The baby is still crying. The fire has gone out again. You poke it with a stick and whisper something encouraging. It doesn't help. You think about how toilets work in the distant future private rooms, scented candles, even music, entire industries built around the concept of doing your business in peace. In your time, relieving yourself is a gamble with your shoes, your pride, and occasionally your life. Slip too far on the latrine plank and they don't find you until spring. As a quirky little tidbit, some people believed that foul smells warded off disease. That's right. The worse it smelled, the better it worked, at least according to medieval science, which ranks somewhere between guessing and superstition with confidence. So, not only is your toilet routine disgusting, it's considered protective. Isn't that comforting? You'd think all of this would make people more mindful of hygiene. But no, you don't wash your hands. There's no soap, no towels, and definitely no sinks. You might rinse off in a puddle if it's nearby and not currently occupied by a goat. Otherwise, you just carry on with your day. Hands coated in the gentle reminder that the modern germ theory won't be discovered for another 600 years. Children, by the way, love this part of life. They treat puddles like toys and have yet to learn the difference between a stick and a latrine scoop. Their immune systems are either miraculous or completely numb from trauma. And yet, somehow you adjust. Everyone around you is equally filthy. Smell has become an identity more than a problem. It's how you know someone's nearby. You recognize your neighbors by their silhouette and their scent. Evenings don't help. The odor in your hut reaches critical levels as the heat rises and the air thickens. Flatulence is a public act, and no one bats an eye. You consider moving outside, but it's raining, and you already lost the dry side of your only cloak to the cow last week. You crawl into bed that night fully aware that whatever's under your fingernails may not be from food. You scratch your leg absently and feel a familiar tickle, another flea, or a splinter, or both. You pull the straw closer and remind yourself you're lucky to still be here, until the Mongols show up. The day grinds on, and with it comes that ancient, nagging ache in your belly. Hunger. Not the kind that comes from skipping lunch, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind you wake up with and go to sleep with. Your body has made peace with being underfed. It simply expects nothing more, which is good, because nothing more is exactly what you're about to eat. You return home at midday, stomping off caked mud that will never fully come out of your clothes. Mostly because washing clothes is a theoretical luxury you can't afford. The hearth is back to life. Someone must have coaxed a few embers into pretending to be fire. A pot hangs over it, bubbling with all the enthusiasm of a damp sigh. You dare to ask what's inside. The answer, as always, is pottage. Pottage is not a meal, it's a concept. A liquid memory of vegetables long dead. Think of it as soup's poorly socialized cousin chunky, colorless, and always slightly gray. Today's version seems to include wilted cabbage, 3 beans, and something suspiciously root-like. You scoop your portion with a ladle that has known despair. No seasoning, no joy, just heat and vague nutrition. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants lived in constant famine or simply in constant disappointment. Technically, many got enough calories to survive, but survival isn't the same as satisfaction, and no one walks away from pottage feeling inspired. You chew and chew. The texture fights back. Whatever vegetable used to be in here has long since surrendered its identity. Sometimes there's barley, if someone traded well that week. But mostly it's turnip again, pretending it's interesting. You've eaten so much turnip that your dreams taste like them. Bread accompanies the meal. And by bread, we mean something brick adjacent, harder than your worldview. It's made of coarse grain, sometimes mixed with sawdust or ground tree bark if the harvest was bad. Today's loaf could repel arrows. You gnaw a piece and feel one of your teeth whisper a quiet farewell. You're not sure if that was a crunch from the bread or your molar giving up. The beer comes next. Because the water, of course, is a microbial lottery with very few winners. Beer is safer, it's been boiled, fermented, and blessed by whatever gods oversee your digestion. Everyone drinks it, old people, children, livestock if it spills. It's weak, but still gives you a soft buzz, enough to smooth the edges of a splinter-filled life. You sip this deeply and exhale the closest thing to relief you've known this week. Sometimes, if a chicken dies of old age or bad luck, you might get a sliver of meat. But not today. Meat is an event. You hear rumors that nobles eat it every day, served by hands that have never once touched manure. You try not to think about it. Envy doesn't cook dinner. You look at your children. One is licking the bowl. Another is trying to chew on the spoon. You're not even mad. You're impressed. Hunger rewires the brain. Meals aren't eaten, they're survived, and still. Somehow, this is considered a good day. As a quirky tidbit, some peasants tried to liven up their meals with herbs grown in tiny gardens: parsley, sage, maybe a little garlic. But spice real, imported spice. That's fantasy. Pepper is a luxury, cinnamon is a rumor, and saffron might as well be unicorn dust. The Silk Road exists, yes, but you're not getting invited. Meals are quiet affairs, not because of etiquette, but because conversation takes energy, and chewing takes most of yours. Also, no one wants to talk about the taste, it'll only make it worse. You eat quickly because time is a luxury. And you're already running behind on your afternoon tasks. The pot is scraped clean. Nothing is wasted. Even the burned crust at the bottom gets eaten charred turnip. Nature's insult. You think briefly about the upper class, the lords and Mongol commanders, feasting in halls where pigs are roasted whole and grapes are peeled. You imagine gold platters, honeyed figs, spices from 100 lands. Then you look at your spoon, whittled from a branch after your last one caught fire. And remember, you are not in a tapestry. You are the person holding up the tapestry with your back. There's no dessert, of course. No snacks, no afternoon tea. If you're lucky, there's enough pottage left to reheat later. Maybe thin it out with water and pretend it's a new recipe. You don't choose the food chooses you, and sometimes it chooses to kill you. With your stomach half filled and your expectations fully lowered, you return to the field. The sky is graying again, and you suspect the weather is about to make things worse. But you've had your meal, such as it is. You survived lunch. Congratulations. You trudge back into the field, the afternoon sun doing its best impression of warmth. But the wind has other plans, slicing through your clothing like a sarcastic knife. And your clothing? Well, clothing is a strong word. It's more like a historically themed prank that never ends. You're wearing the same thing you've worn every day this year, possibly longer. A coarse wool tunic, undyed, unwashed, and unmistakably alive. It itches with the personality of 1,000 tiny needles. Wool is your default fabric because it's what sheep give, and sheep don't charge licensing fees. But wool has a special talent for being simultaneously hot, heavy, and totally useless at resisting wind. Fashion wasn't even born yet, it's still hiding under a rock, waiting for the Renaissance. You tie the tunic with a rope belt, which also doubles as your utility belt, emergency leash, and sometimes toe strap underneath. Maybe you've got some rag-stitched linen underclothes, if it's laundry day, which it isn't. Because laundry requires water, soap, and the will to live. And here's a fun twist: you don't own more than one outfit. No wardrobe, no backup, no going out tunic. You are a one-fit wonder. Your clothes are like your personality, worn, patched, and slowly unraveling. The smell. Let's just say it's an ecosystem. Your body is a full-time host to various invisible creatures, from lice to fleas to mites. You don't get rid of them, you negotiate territory. Lice are in your armpits, fleas prefer the back of your neck. And if you're very unlucky, you've got scabies trying to launch a skin-based revolution. It's a scratchy, crawling, itchy life, and there's no escape. Historians still argue whether peasants even noticed the parasites after a while or just became one with the itch. Some suggest it was so normalized, no one thought to complain. Others say people did complain loudly, but no one listened because everyone was too busy scratching. Shoes, if you can even call them that. You might have leather soles tied on with strips of cloth or twine, often repurposed from broken farming gear. No arch support, no left or right, just foot protection in the vaguest sense. If you don't own shoes, and many don't, you wrap your feet in cloth or animal hide and hope for the best. In winter, that means frostbite. In summer, it means mud and parasites. In between, you just try to avoid stepping on anything sharp, flaming, or fecal. Spoiler, you'll step on all three. And let's not forget your head, if you have a hat. It's made of wool too, usually shaped like a sock and full of personality. Hair care. Not a thing. You wash your hair with water. Maybe. If the village isn't under drought threat or Mongol siege. Soap is rare, usually made from animal fat and wood ash when available. But mostly, your hair just is. You smell like work. Your scalp is its own ecosystem. There are no buttons yet, not for the likes of you. Laces, pins, and brooches hold things together. Assuming you haven't lost them in the mud, metal is expensive. If you own a belt buckle, you're either unusually wealthy or have looted a battlefield. As a quirky fact, some people believed wearing amulets or colored threads could protect against fleas or illness. One guy swore by garlic tied to his shirt. Another wore a dried frog on a string. You'd laugh, but you've tried worse things. At this point, you'd wear a toad crown if it stopped the itching. You try not to sweat too much while working, because your clothes trap the moisture like emotional baggage. And drying them out, that involves fire, space, and not being too exhausted to care. You've worn these clothes in snow, sleet, rain, and the occasional bloodletting. They're not just garments, they're your resume. Laundry is its own epic. First, you need a water source, which might mean hauling buckets for a mile. Then soap, which has to be made or bartered. Then time, which doesn't exist. Most people just rinse their tunic, hang it near the fire, and pray the smoke kills whatever's living inside. Spoiler, it doesn't. The itch is always there. It whispers while you work, grows stronger when you sit, and explodes at night. When your body is too tired to ignore it, scratching becomes a reflex. People trade louse combs like modern folks trade gossip. You spot someone itching their neck and think solidarity. You glance up at the sky and sigh. Your tunic clings to you in all the wrong places. The wind picks up, turning the sweat into instant regret. You're cold, uncomfortable, and crawling with history. But hey, you look just like everyone else. And no one's judging, because they're just as itchy as you. By mid-afternoon, the sun hangs limp in the sky like a tired eye. You pause in your work, wiping your mouth on the back of your hand. And something twangs inside your jaw. Ah, yes, your tooth. The one in the back. Or what's left of it. It has been throbbing all week like it's got its own heartbeat. And today it's decided to start communicating in Morse code. Dental hygiene. Adorable concept. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste, no fluoride, and no dental visits unless you're in the mood for a funeral. Your dental care routine is simple. Don't chew on anything harder than sadness. That's about the limit of your strategy. The pain spreads like gossip. A dull throb travels up into your eye socket, across your cheekbone, down your neck. Every bite of pottage is a gamble. You chew on the other side of your mouth like it owes you money. You dream of apples, but even the soft ones are now weapons of mass molar destruction. Last week, a neighbor tried to eat a stale crust of bread and broke a tooth. He swears he saw God. Historians still argue whether most peasants lost their teeth from decay or simply from grinding down grains full of grit and pebbles. The truth is, your bread is basically edible sandpaper. And every chew files your teeth closer to retirement. By your age, let's say early 30s, you've probably lost several teeth already. You try not to smile too widely, not out of shame, but because smiling hurts. Your gums are receding like the economy. They bleed sometimes, but there's nothing to be done. You rinse your mouth with warm beer and hope for divine intervention. You know someone who tried to brush with a cloth dipped in salt. He now eats exclusively soup. But when the pain gets bad, when it pulses like a drum and keeps you from sleeping, you have two choices. The first, suffer in silence, which is standard procedure. The second, extraction. Ah yes, the medieval tooth removal. A delicate dance of screaming, yanking, and immediate regret. You walk 3 villages over to a man with rusty tools and questionable hygiene. He might be a blacksmith. He might be a priest. Today, he's a dentist. He doesn't sterilize the pliers because he doesn't know what sterilize means. You sit on a stool. He offers you a stick to bite. And then he pulls, or twists, or saws, or all 3. And if the tooth breaks well, then he digs the rest out with something that looks like it should be forging horseshoes. Infection is likely, so is death. But at least the toothache stops either because the tooth is gone or because you are. As a quirky tidbit, some people believe worms cause toothaches. Yes, tiny creatures living inside the teeth, chewing away from within. A common folk cure involves smoking herbs and then letting the smoke rise through a pipe into your mouth to chase the worms out. That's not a joke. That's your best option. You sometimes wonder what a dentist from the future would say if they saw your mouth. They'd scream, then cry, then probably faint. You've got cavities so deep they echo. Your breath could stop a Mongol charge, and there's no floss, not even string to pretend with. If something gets stuck in your teeth, it just stays there, forever. And then there's the medicine. If you're lucky, the local herbalist will mix you something to numb the pain. Chamomile, willow bark, prayers. If you're not lucky, they'll suggest bloodletting. Because clearly, the pain in your mouth is caused by an excess of hot humors, and slicing open a vein in your arm is the obvious solution. Spoiler, it's not. But you let them do it anyway. Because you've run out of ideas. Leeches are another popular option. Stick one on your jaw and let it slurp out your agony. Does it work? Probably not. But it makes people feel involved. You start to think suffering is just a normal state of being, like breathing. But louder. Nobles have their own remedies. Of course, they commission gold thread mouth rinses or honey-soaked clove compresses or prayers from 5 monks at once. But they still lose teeth. Disease doesn't care about titles. The king has no molars either. At night, the pain intensifies. Everything does. You lie on your straw pile, grinding your jaw. Praying the pain knocks you out. You try not to wake the baby with your moaning. The fire dies slowly, shadows stretch, and you stare at the roof, wondering how a single tooth could make you want to disappear. Eventually, exhaustion wins. You drift into a fitful sleep, jaw throbbing in time with your heartbeat, dreaming of a world with soft food, painkillers, and anyone who knows what bacteria are. Dawn again. Or maybe it's still yesterday, hard to say when sleep is something you do between cramps and crowing roosters. Your jaw still throbs, your joints ache like you've been trampled by a small parade, and your eyes open with the enthusiasm of a door hinge rusted shut. Time to get to work. No weekends, no sick days, no such thing as burnout, because you were never ignited in the first place. You rise, stretch just enough to hear something pop, and head out into the cold, misty light. Shovel in hand. You are a medieval farmer. You dig, plow, hoe, seed, and pray, sometimes all at once. The fields are massive. You share them with a few other villagers, and none of you own the land. The Lord does. And the Lord answers to someone else, maybe a prince, or a bishop, or now, increasingly, A Mongol tax official who's not super into mercy. You're at the bottom of a very tall, very stompy pyramid. The tools are simple. A wooden plow, dragged by a tired ox who shares your life philosophy. Keep moving or fall down. The plow blade is iron, rusted, and tied on with leather straps that once belonged to a dead pig. It breaks constantly. When it does, you repair it by muttering a curse and banging it with a rock until it pretends to work again. You dig. The soil's cold and heavy, not quite thawed from winter. Every scoop fights back, the wind cuts through your tunic, dirt gets under your fingernails and stays there, like a souvenir. After an hour, your hands are numb. After 2, they're bleeding. You keep going. Women work beside you, not just a few, most. The idea that the men farm, the women cook is laughable here. Everyone does everything, always. Your wife is in the next row, hauling water and turning compost. With a baby tied to her chest who's chewing on her braid. She'll finish that and go home to cook, clean, patch clothes, and attempt to stop the toddler from eating ash again. She has not sat down since the last full moon. Historians still debate whether medieval women had it worse or just differently bad. On paper, some even had more legal agency than in later centuries. In reality, they just got to suffer more efficiently. Your older children work too. The 5-year-old gathers rocks from the field, dragging a sack that weighs more than she does. The 7-year-old chases crows away from seedlings with a stick and a scream. Education, that's for monks. Your kids learn by doing how to milk a goat, how to weed, how to avoid stepping in human waste, how to identify the sound of thunder versus cavalry. Childhood ends when walking begins. As a quirky tidbit, some villagers used scarecrows not just for birds, but also to ward off spirits. These figures had names, stories, even costumes. Your neighbor's wears a broken helmet and a tunic from someone who hasn't been seen in a while. Comforting. And other jobs, not much better. Blacksmiths inhale smoke all day and lose their hearing by 40. Tanners work knee-deep in urine and animal guts. Millers risk being crushed by their own grindstones. The village healer probably has mercury in her teeth and blood on her apron. You once considered becoming a monk. Back when you were young and idealistic and hadn't yet realized that monasteries are just farms with extra rules. Plus, the Mongols are rumored to burn monasteries too, especially if they confuse chanting for mutiny. You stop for a moment. Your back screams. Your knees join in. You lean on your shovel and think about how much land is left. So much, you might finish it before winter. Maybe, if the frost holds, if the Lord doesn't demand an early harvest, if Mongol riders don't show up and decide this field would look better on fire. There's no quitting, no changing careers. You're not going to reinvent yourself at 33 and start a candle-making side hustle. You dig because it's what you do. You plant because food doesn't fall from the sky. You survive because dying is inconvenient and expensive. At midday, you gnaw on yesterday's pottage. Your hands shake from effort. You eat fast because you still have to collect firewood and patch the pig pen before nightfall. Also, someone has to chase down the goat again. It keeps escaping. And no one wants to admit it's smarter than at least 3 villagers. You go back to work, dirt under your nails, sweat down your back. It never ends. The field grows food, and the food keeps you just alive enough to work the field. It's a beautiful system, really. If you're the one who invented it, you don't notice the weather anymore. Not really. It's not like you can do anything about it, and if you stopped to complain every time it turned against you, you'd never get anything done. But still it finds ways to make itself known. Subtle, intimate ways. Like frostbite or heat stroke, winter in your world doesn't come in gently. It crashes in like a drunk guest, all howling wind and collapsing roofs. Your hut leaks from every angle. The thatch is more holes than coverage, and the walls are stiff with frost, inside and out. You sleep curled tight with your family, not out of affection, but necessity. Body heat is your only central heating system. It's adorable in theory, but less charming when someone starts coughing and no one can tell if it's a cold, pneumonia, or just the draft performing vocal solos through the cracks. You huddle beneath your wool tunic, yes, the same one you worked in, ate in, and yes, used as a napkin. Your blanket is another coarse cloth layered over hay. It's a bit like sleeping under an angry doormat. At least the lice are hibernating. Probably. Your feet freeze first, then your fingers, then your will to live. You scrape frost off the inside of your water bucket just to get a drink. Your breath hangs in the air like fog, adding to the ambience. You light a fire when you can, but wood is scarce. You might burn old tools or furniture if things get desperate. One winter, someone burned their door, just propped a rock in its place and hoped the wolves had manners. Historians still argue whether winters in medieval Eurasia were especially brutal due to the Little Ice Age starting around the 13th century. What's not debated, your fingers are numb, and the wind sounds like it wants your soul. Summer isn't kinder. It doesn't freeze you, it cooks you slowly, like a stew with anxiety. Your hut becomes a kiln by midday. Air thickens. Flies invade in droves. Mosquitoes arrive with their own orchestra section. You sweat constantly. But that sweat doesn't go anywhere. It just pools and soaks into your one outfit, which now sticks to you like a guilty secret. There is no relief, no cold shower, no linen sheets, just shade, if you can find it, and a wish for rain. The animals pant beside you. Your children cry without realizing why. Your water boils just by sitting in the sun. You try to stay in the shade of the field, but the work drags on. And heat stroke is something you don't know the word for, you just know what it feels like: spinning head, weak knees, sudden urge to nap forever. Your clothing doesn't help. That wool tunic that failed you in winter is now a portable sauna. You've tried soaking it, but it dries stiff and crusty, and sometimes grows things that shouldn't grow. Shoes trap heat like a blacksmith's forge, and barefoot, walking on sun-baked paths is an open invitation to blisters. As a quirky seasonal twist, people once believed cucumbers cooled the blood. You've tried eating one, but they taste like warm sadness and dirt. Still, better than nothing. There's also superstition, placing damp herbs under your pillow, sleeping with your feet toward the door, praying to the local saint of seasonal tolerance. None of it works. Spring mud, endless, soul-sucking mud. The thaw turns roads into slop and fields into obstacle courses. You lose a shoe. A child disappears waist-deep once. You dig her out with a rake and don't talk about it. That's just spring. And autumn. Ah yes, a cruel joke. The temperature drops too fast, the crops ripen too late, and the anxiety of winter creeps into your bones long before the frost does. You gather what you can, knowing it won't be enough. It never is. You pray it's a mild season, even though you know that prayers are mostly decorative. There is no proper gear, no coats, no scarves, no umbrellas. If it rains, you get wet. If it hails, you hide under a bucket. If the sun's too strong, you tie a rag around your head and call it innovation. Your skin is constantly reacting, blistered, cracked, sunburnt, frostbitten. One arm is darker than the other from plowing all day. Your nose peels in layers, like an old onion. Your knuckles split and bleed. And yet, somehow, you keep going. Because you have to. Because the weather isn't your enemy, it's your boss. And like all terrible bosses, it never gives you time off. You wipe sweat or maybe rain. You've stopped caring off your forehead as dusk settles over the village. One more chore before you can collapse in your splintery straw pile water. The source of all life, and most of your problems. There's a stream about half a mile away. Not a well, not a fountain, not a modern tap blessed with cold and hot settings. Just a gently trickling ribbon of murk that's been shared by your entire village. The livestock, and most likely a few passing diseases. You carry your wooden bucket, still damp from its last use, which may or may not have involved washing feet, carrying stew, or catching rain. Multi-purpose, efficient, slightly terrifying. The stream glistens in the fading light. It looks clean. But so did that meat last month before it gave half the village diarrhea. You crouch and fill the bucket slowly, trying not to stir up the bottom muck where worms like to swim. If you're lucky, the frogs have moved downstream. If you're unlucky, you'll hear a splash and start praying. This water will be used for drinking, cooking, rinsing children, and if someone's feeling ambitious, maybe even bathing. Let's talk about that. Bathing is a practice so rare it's practically ceremonial. You don't bathe weekly or monthly. You bathe when someone dies, when someone gets married, or when you've reached a level of stink that makes the livestock cry. The processes involved heating water over a fire time-consuming, pouring it into a barrel or tub if you have one, undressing awkward, and then sitting naked in tepid broth while every insect in the room declares open season. People say bathing too often weakens the body, opens your pores, lets the bad air in. Disease, according to medical knowledge of your time, enters through vulnerability. And what's more vulnerable than standing wet and naked in front of your cousin? Historians still argue whether medieval people avoided bathing because of superstition, scarcity of resources, or sheer practicality. But whatever the reason, nobody's lathering up with lavender soap. You scrub with coarse cloths, or sand, or sometimes ash. Soap is made of lye and fat and smells like decisions you regret. Your skin is never fully clean, it's just a thin crust of effort over years of grime. Your hair, when not tangled into a nest, is matted from sweat, smoke, and desperation. Children are usually rinsed off once in spring and again before harvest. That's their annual spa package. But the real danger is the water itself. It's full of parasites, dysentery, cholera, tapeworms, and a delightful guest called bloody flux, which is just as charming as it sounds. If the water looks too still, you walk farther. If it looks too fast, you wonder if it carried away the last person who tried to bathe in it. You've heard tales of people boiling their water. Fancy. But firewood is limited, and you're not wasting 3 hours to get a warm bucket, when you could just close your eyes and hope your immune system grew up fast. And drinking the water Russian roulette. Peasant edition. You sip it warm, earthy, and tasting faintly of iron, frog memory, and whatever died upstream. If you fall sick, you rest in bed, read floor, chew on willow bark, and maybe let the healer chant over your stomach while swinging dried herbs. And if you recover, congratulations. You've passed another test in the peasant survival simulator. Sometimes, someone gets clever and collects rainwater. That's the best case scenario, soft, sweet, untainted. But you have to catch it first, and not in the bucket used for everything else. Which, good luck. As a quirky tidbit, some people believed that certain springs had magical properties. Pilgrims would travel days to dip in holy water pools, hoping to cure rashes, blindness, or the vague sensation of being haunted by water demons. One woman swore she was cured of tooth rot after dunking her head in a puddle struck by lightning. You've considered it. At the end of the day, you pour the water into a jug by the fire. You might dip your hands in and pretend you're washing. You might even run a wet cloth over your face, civilized. Right, but you know better than to expect cleanliness. You're not aiming for fresh. You're aiming for not lethal. You curl up beside your family. The baby mumbles in its sleep. The fire pops once. Outside, an owl hoots. You think of the bucket by the door, the latrine behind the house, and the stream that never stops moving. No matter who drinks from it, you close your eyes and let exhaustion pull you under. Just one more day of water, work, and whatever waits beyond the hills. And now, finally, you rest. The straw under your body crackles gently as your limbs go still. Your breathing slows. The room is warm with the weight of shared silence family. Animals, ghosts of meals past. Outside, the night continues its steady hum, whined through loose shutters, soft snuffling of pigs, the occasional bark of a far-off dog standing guard against a darkness full of what-ifs. You've worked, you've endured, you've survived a day in a world that didn't care if you did. But for now, there's peace. Your tunic may itch, your back may ache, and your teeth may whisper angry secrets. Yet sleep comes anyway, soft and slow. You feel it wrap around you like the faintest blanket, warm in its own way. Tomorrow will be the same mud, firewood, hunger, maybe worse. But tomorrow isn't here yet. So breathe. Let your thoughts drift like wood smoke in the rafters. Let the weight of the world lift. Just for tonight. You're safe, you're still here. And in a place without comfort. That's a kind of miracle. Good night, time traveler. Now, we slide back through time, not just a few decades, not even a few centuries, but all the way to the year 1328. You wake up not in your bed, but in a manor house with rushes scattered across the stone floor, a fire that belches more smoke than heat, and an entire staff of servants who treat you like an artifact and a liability all at once. You're 3 years old. Congratulations, you're a noblewoman, which means you own nothing, choose nothing, and by sunset, might be promised to someone twice your age because your family needs a better alliance with the Earl 2 counties over. It's England. And yes, the food is beige. Everything smells like smoke, wool and unresolved feudal tension. You toddle down a hallway, dragging your favorite rag doll by the ear. And some governess in itchy linen corrects your posture with a look sharp enough to cut cheese. Childhood here isn't an age. It's a phase you're meant to skip. Like a medieval version of the tutorial level. You would never think that someone your size, who still mixes up her left shoe with her right, could be legally engaged, but here we are. Marriage isn't about love. It's about keeping land in the family, securing bloodlines, and making sure nobody inconveniently marries below their station. So while your peers in the village might be learning how to chase chickens or climb trees, you're being taught how to carry a goblet without sloshing, smile without teeth, and address minor baronesses as my lady with a perfectly measured curtsy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's listening to the life of a child bride while eating cereal in Sydney. Back to the manor, your father is a knight or a baron or something impressive sounding, and your mother wears more rings than she has fingers. You, little Alice or Eleanor or Joan. Those were the greatest hits of noble naming, are barely old enough to pronounce your own title. And yet today, you're being fitted for a gown because your parents are negotiating your future like it's a livestock trade. You overhear something about dowries and heritable claims while someone combs your hair so tightly, you wonder if your scalp is detachable. Outside, peasants are complaining about grain taxes and whether or not there's going to be another frost this week. Inside, you're being evaluated like a prize foal. Good bone structure, clear eyes, breeding potential. You're part of a system where lineage is everything, and individuality is politely discouraged until you're old enough to inherit something or die of something. Here's a fun historical fact to help you sleep in 14th century England. Girls could legally be betrothed at age 3 and married by 12. That wasn't even scandalous, that was just Thursday. It was particularly common among the nobility, where political alliances were more binding than the actual marriage vows. And the marriage itself was often a very long prelude to a single shared bedroom. As for whether the children understood what was happening, historians still argue about that. Some suggest these girls were fully indoctrinated from birth, taught their role, rehearsed their curtsies, and knew exactly what being married would eventually mean. Others believe they were shuffled around like ornamental chess pieces, too young to grasp the significance of the ceremonies, but old enough to sense the tension. After all, a 3-year-old might not know what a marriage contract is, but she knows when everyone around her suddenly starts staring at her like she's the answer to their inheritance problems. You play with your food at dinner and get a warning glance from your mother. Ladylike, she whispers, "A fork isn't for stabbing." Apparently, your father drinks something dark from a silver cup and says the word betrothal like it's a weather forecast. No one asks you. You are the table offering, not a participant in the feast. They are arranging you like a side dish to accompany their main course of ambition. In the corner, a tapestry hangs depicting some saint doing something noble, probably bleeding artistically into the arms of a lion. You don't care. Your shoes itch. Your dress is too tight. And by morning, a messenger will be riding off with your engagement parchment. Sealed with wax and optimism, the fire crackles as you drift off, not knowing that your fate has already been sealed before you've even learned how to read. It smells like roast meat, spilled wine, and very forced merriment. You sit at the edge of a high table that is, quite literally, above everyone else, raised on a wooden dais, which means you're allowed to look down on people, even though you can't reach your cup without help. Someone tucks a napkin under your chin like you're about to eat soup, but it's actually to keep the velvet of your dress from soaking up gravy. You are 3 years old, and tonight is your betrothal banquet. That's right, a party. For you. But not the cake and games kind. This one involves half a pig, 2 lutes, and 5 men talking loudly about the boundaries of your future husband's inheritance. You watch them clink goblets while a minstrelsy duo in the corner strangles out something vaguely cheerful. And while you chew on a piece of bread so dense it could double as a roofing tile, 2 families toast to your union. You don't understand most of the words marital rights, dynastic consolidation, quarter fee estate, but you do understand that everyone keeps looking at you like you're a very valuable vase. Pretty, fragile, and mostly decorative. The groom-to-be sits across the table. He's maybe 13, maybe 15, and dressed like he just walked out of a stained glass window, cloaked, laced, and trying not to make eye contact. You don't know him. You're not sure if he's the one who tried to hand you a cherry earlier or the one who tripped over a hound. Either way, he's clearly been instructed to look solemn and respectable, which translates to not blinking and pretending the mead isn't making him hiccup. Welcome to the 14th century English engagement party, where children stare into the flickering candlelight and parents pretend this is all perfectly normal. Which, to be fair, it is for them. Among the nobility, marrying young wasn't just common, it was expected, especially if your family had land, titles, or something valuable to offer. You are that something. Mainstream historical fact, easy noble families often arranged betrothals before the children could even speak full sentences. The betrothal called sponsalia de futuro wasn't a true marriage yet, just a legally binding promise that the marriage would happen. kind of like laying claim to a nice piece of furniture before it's finished being carved. The moment comes quietly. Your father stands. Everyone hushes. A steward drops a fork. Then comes the parchment, pulled from a leather tube like it's sacred scripture. Your name, his name, a few family lineages, and a promise of land exchanged like it's on loan from destiny itself. A seal is pressed, hot wax hissing on the table. And that's it. You're affianced, engaged, a future lady something or other. Your reaction, mild indigestion and a desire to nap. But your nursemaid pinches your side gently but decisively, and you sit up straighter. Smile, nod, don't drool. There's a painter in the corner sketching you both like it's a coronation. The irony. You're wearing shoes you can't walk in and a gown that took 3 people to lace. And yet, in this absurd theater of noblesse, the stakes are real. If either of you backs out later, families can lose land, credibility, or allies. In some cases, wars broke out over broken engagements, literal wars, because Geoffrey didn't want to marry Isabella after all. So yes, while you're sitting there bored and a little gassy, adults around you are silently praying nothing goes wrong with this incredibly awkward toddler engagement. You get a slice of something sweet for dessert, some dried fruit mashed into a pie crust, harder than your pillow, and you think maybe this banquet thing isn't so bad. Until your mother reminds you to offer it first to your fiancé. You do, and he accepts it like it's a knighthood. Congratulations, you've just completed your first performative gesture as a noblewoman. Quirky tidbit in some noble families. Small children wore symbolic wedding bands made of gold thread or soft wax just long enough for a quick blessing and a portrait, then safely removed before a choking hazard lawsuit from 700 years in the future could emerge. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies was meant more for binding contracts or performing status. Was it about sealing a political alliance in the most dramatic way possible? Or simply ensuring all the other noble families saw how very eligible your bloodline was, even if it still needed naps and applesauce? The banquet stretches into the night. More toasts, more boasts, more talk about whose horse that threw a shoe in Yorkshire. You nod off briefly and get nudged awake so you can be present for the final blessing, which involves a priest who smells like onions and mutters Latin over you both like he's seasoning a stew. Finally, it ends. The men drink one last round. The scroll is rolled, sealed, and handed to a squire who will guard it like it's the Magna Carta. You are led away to bed, escorted like a tiny duchess, your braid repinned and your fingers still sticky from pie. You fall asleep thinking of music, meat, and that boy whose name you still haven't quite learned. You are 3 years old, and you are engaged. You're 4 now, which means you've reached the ripe old age of being expected to sit still while someone sticks pins into your hair and mutters about how the veil must drape flatter. It's fitting day again. You've got a new wardrobe, if by wardrobe you mean several woolen cages disguised as dresses, a headpiece that doubles as a weather radar, and a pair of shoes so pointy they could qualify as weapons in some jurisdictions. Today you try on your formal betrothal attire, a phrase that sounds more majestic than it feels. Your sleeves are so long you could probably smuggle a pheasant in each. Your shoes, sewn from imported Spanish leather, were made by a man who clearly hated children, and the fabric velvet, dyed with insects and prestige. You're told to be still while someone laces your bodice so tight you briefly forget how lungs work. Bridal fashion for noble girls in the 14th century wasn't exactly about comfort, it was about status. Silk meant you had connections. Fur trims meant your father had paid his taxes to the right lord. And elaborate headdresses, some that towered like spires, meant you were available, valuable, and fully owned by dynastic ambition. Your favorite piece, if you had to pick, Is the girdle belt a long jeweled chain that loops around your waist and hangs down like a bejeweled tail? It swings when you walk and jingles when you fidget, which, of course, you're told not to do. Every item on your body sends a message, mostly something along the lines of, "This small human is expensive and politically important." Here's your mainstream historical fact of the day. Noble children, especially girls, were dressed in full adult-style outfits once they hit toddlerhood. There was no kids section at the tailor's shop. The fashion was scaled down, but not softened, because to look the part of nobility meant dressing like a shrunken-down version of your adult self, ideally. Someone a bishop would approve of and a cousin of the king might want to marry. But let's not forget the accessories. You're handed a miniature prayer book with a clasp so sharp it could double as a bear trap. You also get a decorative dagger, yes. Really, because apparently nothing says virginal virtue like a blade crusted with faux rubies. You don't get to use it. Of course, that would be unladylike. You just carry it for the symbolism, loyalty, chastity, and readiness to be silently noble while surrounded by unstable adults. Today's quirky detail lead-based makeup wasn't just for bored queens and overambitious courtiers. In rare but not unheard of cases, young noble girls, especially those being paraded for portraiture or audiences, were lightly powdered to appear more delicate. That's right, toxic cosmetics, now in toddler sizes, because nothing says childhood like face paint that could eventually kill you. The big moment today is the unveiling, literally. You're presented before your future in-laws, who have ridden in with a small army of liveried attendants and one surprisingly flatulent greyhound. The whole manor smells like wet wool and anxiety. You curtsy exactly as rehearsed, ankles crossed, eyes down, smile polite but not gleeful. Too much glee is unbecoming, too little, and someone accuses you of being spirited, which is medieval for troublesome. You're placed on a small stool beside your betrothed. He's now 15 and pretending very hard to understand Latin. You both sit quietly while the adults talk over you, beneath you, and occasionally about you, as if you're part of the furniture. A heated debate breaks out over how much land your father should pledge to secure your dowry. It's essentially a tax negotiation disguised as a tea party. Historians still argue whether these elaborate wardrobe rituals were empowering acts of noble identity or just another way to smother girls beneath layers of fabric and social expectation. Was the bridal veil a symbol of coming prestige, or a shroud you weren't allowed to remove? You scratch your ear and get a sharp look from the steward. The veil is supposed to stay in place, even if it itches like a hay bale dipped in brambles. But it's all worth it, apparently, because a traveling painter has come to sketch your wedding likeness. You sit for hours while he captures your image in oils, which will be sent to distant relatives to prove you're healthy, docile, and most importantly styled like a very short duchess. Later, you're allowed to change into your casual evening frock, which feels like taking off a bear costume and replacing it with a slightly smaller bear. You breathe easier, but only slightly. Your maid praises you for enduring the wardrobe ordeal without crying. She gives you a sweet something sticky wrapped in a fig leaf and calls you our little lady. You fall asleep in your undersmock, still wearing the girdle belt because no one remembered to take it off. It's just tight enough to remind you, even in dreams, that your body isn't quite yours anymore. It belongs to the plan. You wake to bells. Not joyful. Hooray, it's your birthday bells. These are get up and be productive before the stew goes cold bells. It's dawn in your 4th or maybe 5th year, honestly. No one's quite sure, and your life is now a curriculum. A very serious, very stiff, very quiet curriculum where smiling too much counts as a disciplinary problem. Breakfast porridge. Again, because fiber is forever. You eat it while seated on a wooden bench that's somehow both too tall and too splintery. A governess with the emotional warmth of wet stone tells you to chew quietly, then recites today's lesson plan embroidery, Latin, moral instruction, and a few hours walking with a book on your head. Because posture, like lineage, must be straight and unyielding. There is no toys. You had a doll once, but she disappeared after you tried to baptize her in the courtyard fountain. Now your only play is threading needles and repeating Latin proverbs that no one your age should know, let alone use correctly in a sentence. You say mulier taxiat in ecclesia, let the woman be silent in church, and everyone claps. Not because you understand it, but because it means you're learning to stay quiet. This is what it means to be raised noble and female. In the 14th century, you are being trained to be useful, not to yourself, to your family, to your future husband, to your title. You're like a medieval Swiss army knife. If that knife could curtsy, manage an estate, and host a feast without saying anything politically ruinous, here's your historical fact. For the night, noble girls were expected to be educated, but only in ways that reinforced their roles as obedient daughters and future wives. Reading was fine if it was scripture. Writing was acceptable if it was letters to their husbands or prayers to saints. And arithmetic only if you were managing household accounts and not, heaven forbid, plotting escape. You spend hours practicing needlepoint, not because anyone needs more embroidered cushions, but because it's a skill that proves you're disciplined, patient, and demure. Your sampler reads, "Fear God, obey thy husband, stitch neatly." It's not clear whether that third one is biblical, but it's definitely the one you get scolded for the most. Now comes deportment. You're made to walk from one side of the chamber to the other while balancing a silver tray. The governess watches like a hawk with a ruler. You wobble once and hear the dreaded sigh of disappointment, which cuts deeper than any slap. The goal isn't just elegance, it's control. If you can glide across a room without breaking a thing or making eye contact, you're halfway to winning the social lottery. Your future in-laws have sent a list of preferred virtues. Apparently, they'd like you to be pious, pale, fluent in French, and not too spirited. So, no jokes, no running, and definitely no asking why the bishop smells like turnips. That was last week, and you're still paying for it. Today's quirky tidbit: noble girls were sometimes taught how to detect heresy. Yes, in between practicing calligraphy and reciting psalms, you were trained to notice if someone said the wrong thing about the Eucharist, like a very short, very velvet-wrapped spy. One handbook even advised noble women to listen carefully during dinner in case a guest accidentally revealed themselves as a lollard. Nothing like keeping an ear out for theological rebellion while serving pigeon pie. Lessons drag on. You're corrected for interrupting, even though you were answering a question. You're praised for your quiet composure, which you've learned is adult code for "we forgot you were in the room." The high point of your day is a short walk in the garden, where you admire the hedges and try to remember what running feels like. Historians still argue whether this kind of training was empowering or simply cosmetic. On one hand, it gave noble girls tools language, literacy, land management. On the other hand, all those tools came in a box labeled "Use only with husband's permission." You return to your chamber for supper, which is cold trout and warm cider. A lady's maid brushes your hair for 40 full minutes while you stare into a mirror that doesn't belong to you. You try to picture your future, but it looks like more lessons, more layers, more Latin. When the candle's snuffed and the rushlights fade, you lie in bed tracing patterns on the linen with your finger. You're already exhausted, already shaped into someone else's ideal, and you haven't even turned 7. You see him again at a feast meant to celebrate something vague, his recent knighting. A minor military victory, or just the fact that it didn't rain that week. Either way, it's another excuse to drag out the good pewter, roast a peacock, and display the future bride and groom like matching salt shakers. He's older now, taller, a little less baby-faced, and a little more smug in the way teenage boys often are when they've recently inherited a horse and a handful of vassals. He wears armor that clangs unnecessarily with every step, and his sword is the size of your torso. He nods at you across the room like you're a trusted ally in a very boring war. And that's probably the most you'll get from him for another year. You're 6, he's 16, he forgets your name sometimes. This is your betrothed. You sit side by side during the meal, not speaking much. He says something about hawks. You say yes, my lord, like your governess taught you. He doesn't notice the way you stare at the roast parsnips and wonder what life would be like if you were a peasant. Eating turnips with people who didn't think of you as a breeding strategy. You're not afraid of him. Not exactly. He's just an assignment, a walking title with hair. You've been told to love him eventually, or at least admire him in public, which is sort of the same thing in this world. Love, in your case, is less about feelings and more about presentation. You smile when he speaks. You nod when he gestures. You hold your goblet correctly and resist the urge to wipe your nose on your sleeve. Here's your historical fact: noble marriages in medieval England often involved a wide age gap, especially if the groom came into his inheritance early. Boys could marry as early as 14, girls at 12, but betrothals began much younger. And those betrothals were legal contracts, complete with witnesses, blessings, and sometimes a small sword ceremony for flair. But despite the contract, you and your groom-to-be live separate lives. He's training for battle, studying the art of war, or traveling between properties with his tutors and retainers. You, meanwhile, are mastering the delicate balance of not speaking unless spoken to and always appearing pleasingly meek. You both belong to each other, but only in the paperwork. In practice, you're two satellites orbiting a future neither of you fully understands. Your families exchange letters long, florid scrolls sealed with wax and decorated with unnecessarily large signatures. They discuss property rights, dowries, future heirs, and which abbey has the best confession schedule. You are mentioned often, usually in phrases like "our daughter is progressing in her womanly graces," or "the girl now recites psalms with most respectable clarity." You become fluent in this language of proxy affection. Your fiancé sends a gift, once a carved wooden horse. It's charming until you realize it was re-gifted from a prior engagement that fell through when the girl caught a fever. You name the horse Uncertainty and hide it behind your combs. Today's quirky detail: some noble boys were actually trained in how to behave around their very young brides. There were informal rules: don't frighten her, don't try to kiss her in front of bishops, and definitely don't make jokes about childbirth until she's old enough to laugh politely. It's like etiquette school, but for arranged marriage. You meet him again 6 months later, this time at a church blessing where the priest speaks more to your parents than to either of you. You catch a whiff of his cologne, some musky blend that makes your nose itch, and you both kneel at the altar like you've rehearsed this pose in a pageant. He squeezes your hand briefly. You think it's supposed to be comforting. It mostly feels like pressure. Historians still debate whether these arranged couples ever truly felt like partners. Were they just co-managers of land and title, polished strangers forced into cohabitation? Or did some, in the long quiet years of shared obligation, find actual companionship? You don't know yet. You're still too young to picture living with him. But you do picture what his estate looks like. They say it has gardens and a private chapel, and walls thicker than your governess's sarcasm. You imagine the view from your future window. Maybe you'll see swans. Maybe you'll see your own reflection and finally recognize it. You fall asleep that night with your head full of questions no one will answer. Will he be kind? Will he remember your name next time? Will you ever be allowed to speak freely? Probably not, but you do know this: he's yours. Or more accurately, you're his. And the roast parsnips were terrible. You sit in the great hall, watching a pigeon flap aimlessly near the rafters, while your nursemaid gently scrapes crumbs from your lap. No one tells you much, but you know the mood is tense because your father hasn't smiled since Michaelmas. Paperwork has arrived, crinkled, heavy, and carried in by a courier who looks like he's aged 30 years on the road. He bows so low his hat falls off. And then everyone is suddenly very busy with scrolls. This is the part of your marriage most people forget the royal approval game. Because even though your family arranged it, blessed it, and threw a feast complete with a minstrelsy duo who couldn't stay in key, none of it matters unless the king says yes. Yes, the actual king. You, a 6-year-old with jam on your sleeve, are waiting for the crown to confirm your engagement. That's how it works in your world. All noble matches need royal blessing, especially if they involve land, titles, or even the faintest whiff of future rebellion. Marrying without it, that's not a wedding. That's a betrayal with extra embroidery. Your father is pacing. Your mother is reading the king's response out loud with all the warmth of a tax official. The verdict pending consideration, which is medieval, for he'll get to it once he's done with the crusade, the joust, or whichever distant cousin just tried to poison someone again. Meanwhile, you keep learning psalms and sewing initials into handkerchiefs you'll never use. Your fiancé sends a hawk feather, no note. You pretend it's meaningful. Let's pause for a historical fact in 14th century England. Noble marriages, especially among powerful families, were subject to royal consent. This wasn't just courtesy, it was legal necessity. Kings had the final say on who could consolidate power through marriage. They weren't just monarchs. They were matchmaking overlords with a fondness for meddling. But obtaining that royal seal, it's an art form of its own. Your family has already sent gifts: venison, rare manuscripts, possibly a really good cheese wheel, and now they're sending more. One squire carries a cask of mead so strong it could knock out a boar. Another presents a tapestry of St. George, with your family crest tactically embroidered onto his sword hilt. These are the bribes. Sorry, gifts. You're taught not to call them bribes, even though that's exactly what they are: soft diplomacy, woven in wool and soaked in honey wine. And while the men fuss over petitions and lineage charts, you're paraded in front of visiting officials to demonstrate suitability. That means smiling, curtsying, and not mentioning your future husband's name in the same sentence as the word loud. You're inspected like livestock, but spoken to like royalty. A delicate contradiction you're getting better at surviving. Today's quirky tidbit: sometimes royal approval was delayed so long that one or both of the children grew up and changed families before it was granted. In rare cases, girls were re-betrothed 3 times before the crown finally said yes to one of them. Like medieval speed dating. But every round lasts 4 years. You overhear a conversation you're not meant to hear your uncle saying the match might fall through if the king's advisors find a better prospect for your groom. Your stomach knots. You thought this was all decided, signed, toasted, blessed by a priest who sneezed on you. But it turns out your entire future can be paused, postponed, or redirected with a single ink blot from Westminster. Historians still argue whether royal consent protected noblewomen or merely commodified them more thoroughly. Was it a safeguard from disastrous matches, or just another layer of control from a monarchy eager to puppet master everyone below the throne? Eventually, a rider comes. He's fast, mud-splattered, exhausted, but he's holding a ribbon-wrapped scroll, like it contains salvation. The king has approved your betrothal. Celebrations begin immediately. Bread is baked, bells are rung. Someone brings out the emergency pudding. You're summoned to a small chapel for an official prayer of thanks. You kneel beside your mother, who whispers, "Smile like the Virgin, not like a fool." You try, but it's hard to look holy when your knees hurt and you're wondering if the pudding will still be warm. The scroll is placed in a carved chest lined with velvet, as if it's a holy relic. And in a way, it is. It means you're no longer just a future wife. You are approved, official, legal, royal. It also means your title, your dowry, and your body now belong to the great chessboard of English politics. You're still a child, but now you're his child bride, with the king's blessing. You sleep soundly that night, unaware that someone in Westminster is already planning what your own children might marry. You wake in a new bed, in a new chamber, in a manner that smells like someone boiled 100 onions and then set fire to the curtains. This isn't your father's house anymore. This is your premarital residence, a phrase which means the place you live while being a wife on paper and a child in practice. You are 7, technically betrothed, technically half married, but practically you spend most days in a corner chamber surrounded by women who fuss over your stitching and whisper in a variety of accents about whether or not your fiancé is growing a moustache yet. The marriage has been declared, the royal seal waxed into permanence, but the consummation part, the actual living together bit, is still years away. This strange, sticky middle zone is where you now reside. You are Lady something or other, but you still sleep with a night lamp and a carved toy donkey named Edgar. No one tells you what comes next. Exactly. Just that you must be ready. So you keep preparing learning estate management, letter writing, polite laughter, and the difference between a pheasant and a partridge, important for feast etiquette and small talk with aging abbots. You are also now officially in charge of a few servants. Or rather, you're instructed by them while pretending it's the other way around. A woman named Mistress Joan teaches you how to check the kitchen accounts, spot a lazy laundress, and judge cheese firmness with nothing but a frown. These are essential skills. Apparently, your future husband, meanwhile, is off somewhere with his uncle, learning warfare and diplomacy, which in medieval terms means yelling at people while wearing chainmail. You write him once a month, carefully copying the script your tutor provides. It begins with, "My dearest lord and joy of my soul," and ends with "in humble service." Your future wife. You're never quite sure what goes in the middle, so you usually describe the weather. Sometimes he writes back. Usually it's something about falconry. Once, he drew you a picture of a sword. You drew him a cat wearing a hat. No reply. Here's your historical fact. Noble girls in medieval England were often moved to live with their in-laws after betrothal, but before full marriage. These years were spent in grooming, training, and always waiting for the signal that their married life would formally begin. These arrangements also allowed the families to monitor the bride's behavior, ensuring she didn't disgrace anyone by, say, reading the wrong psalm or laughing in public. You sometimes visit your own parents. These visits are formal, scheduled, and supervised by 3 different people, one of whom always falls asleep during Vespers. You ask your mother if your groom is nice. She replies, "He's important." You ask if you'll be allowed to read books after marriage. She replies, "Don't ask foolish things." That's the last question you ask for a while. Letters fly between your household and his like some very slow and inefficient messaging app. Your father debates with your father-in-law over dowry parcels and whether or not you should inherit the garden estate near Shropshire. No one asks you, but you do overhear that your land value has gone up, which is apparently something to be proud of, like a prize cow that started producing gold-tinged milk. You learn to entertain guests. This mostly means nodding during long stories about taxes and gently redirecting drunken knights away from the tapestries. One guest asks if you enjoy being married. You answer that the porridge here is better, which is both safe and, honestly, accurate. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some noble girls who were betrothed but not yet fully wed were given symbolic keys to chests they weren't allowed to open. These keys represented their future role as Lady of the Manor. You have 3. You wear them on your belt like shiny lies. Historians still debate how much these child brides understood about their roles. Some accounts suggest a quiet acceptance, others hint at fear, or even moments of rebellion, like one girl who reportedly threw her own engagement gift down a well. You consider this once, while holding a brooch shaped like a lion with a smirk. But the well is far away, and so is courage. Instead, you settle into the rhythm of limbo. Not a child, not a wife, not free, but not entirely powerless either. You learn that silence can be strategic, that smiling at the right time makes men underestimate you, and that no one pays attention when you eavesdrop while stitching quietly in a corner. You fall asleep some nights, wondering when it will happen, this mysterious next step no one will name. You wonder if you'll have a choice. Deep down, you know the answer. But tonight, you dream instead of the toy donkey Edgar, dancing with the cat in the hat. At least they look happy. The day they say it's time, no one actually says what it is. They didn't stay for the grand finale usually, but they watched the lead-in like it was an opening act to a very uncomfortable play. Tonight's quirky tidbit in especially high-status marriages. It was tradition for the couple to be tucked into bed by witnesses, literally tucked in. Blankets adjusted, pillows fluffed. Sometimes wine was served. Sometimes jokes were made. Sometimes, heaven help us, a priest blessed the sheets. Scholars still argue whether this ritual was sincere or just an elaborate form of collective denial. You're not thinking about any of that. You're thinking about how cold your feet are, and whether you remembered all the proper steps. Curtsy, kneel, accept the goblet, say my lord, and walk without tripping. You manage all of them. You even smile. You are calm, because you have been trained to be. You are silent, because you have been told to be. You are terrified, but no one seems to notice. A woman leads you to a bed strewn with herbs meant to encourage fertility. Translation: it smells like a salad bar. You lie down. He joins you. You wait for whatever happens next. You do not ask questions. You already know the answers would be given in metaphors anyway. Here's your historical fact. The church considered consummation a necessary part of marriage. Without it, the marriage could be annulled. This gave consummation enormous legal weight, not just personal, but political. A girl who refused it could be accused of disobedience. A man who failed at it could lose his title. You don't know about the canon law. You just know the door closes, and you are alone with him. He says something kind. You nod. And whatever happens next, you survive it. Historians still argue how often these ceremonies were delayed, disguised, or only partially enacted. In many cases, the bride's age meant the marriage remained symbolic for years after the wedding night. But in other cases like yours, it proceeded as expected, because everyone decided that 12 was old enough to fulfill a contract. There is no violence tonight, just awkwardness, uncertainty, and the quiet sound of lives rearranging under heavy blankets. The next morning, there are sheets to check. Yes, that tradition. You're warned about it the night before, that someone might inspect the linens for proof. Sometimes it's a midwife. Sometimes it's a priest. Sometimes it's just a gossipy aunt with too much time and not enough boundaries. It's not optional. It's ceremony, legality, and family pride all rolled into one stained cotton square. You lie still, eyes wide open, and wonder how did it come to this a week ago. You were threading peacock feathers into a cushion for your chamber chair. Today, you are being congratulated by strangers for a night you barely understood. Everyone smiles. Everyone says, "What a fine match." Everyone eats extra pudding. You sit quietly, hands folded, back straight. And you begin to understand your life is no longer your own. It's been handed off, like a letter written by someone else. But you still have your own thoughts, your own name, your own breath. Slow and steady beneath layers of expectation. You're a wife now, and somehow still only 12. Days pass, then weeks. The new rhythm of your life settles like dust in a room that's forgotten how to be clean. You're a wife now, a lady, no longer half anything. People speak to you with more formality, yet somehow less warmth. You receive visitors, mostly other noble women with pursed smiles and firm opinions on bread texture. You're offered advice that comes wrapped in compliments and tied with fear. A quiet wife keeps a quiet house, they say, and a quiet house is a safe one. You nod, always nod. You're expected to manage your new home, which includes deciding how many candles are too many in the chapel, and whether the cook should be replaced for over-seasoning. The truth is, you don't care about candle rations. You care that no one asks how you're sleeping, or if you miss the garden at your father's estate, or what you think of the way your name sounds now that it's paired with his. You do your duties, you bless the food, you host the feasts, you smile at his jokes, even when they are about you not eating enough. Everyone laughs, you count your own breaths, and then inevitably you're pregnant. There's no big announcement, no music, just a sudden shift in how people speak around you. Softer, slower, like you might break or bloom, and they're not sure which. You feel sick most mornings and afraid every night. You're not yet 13. Here's your final historical fact. Many noble women were mothers in their early teens. It was considered ideal. In fact, more time to produce heirs. Your youth was seen not as a risk, but as a resource. And while some girls survived it all and became powerful matriarchs, others simply faded silently, delicately into graves marked only by initials. You don't think of death, not yet. You focus on tasks, folding linens, writing letters, naming herbs, naming possible babies. You like the name Matilda. You keep that one secret, sometimes, at night. You lie awake staring at the wooden beams above you and listen to the silence between each heartbeat. You wonder if this is what growing up always feels like, being made smaller by the things expected of you. Your husband treats you kindly now, or perhaps just carefully, the way a man might handle a valuable artifact with cracks he's pretending not to see. He brings you apples. You pretend to enjoy them. Visitors praise your composure. The priest praises your womb. You start to forget the girl who once embroidered unicorns into her cushion covers. Historians still argue about the women like you. Some say you were victims raised to serve, never to speak. Passed from father to husband like an heirloom. Others claim you had power in your own quiet way. That behind every successful lord was a wife keeping the ledgers, arranging the alliances, and choosing when to blink and when to stare. Maybe you're both. Eventually, you do have a child, a daughter. She is small and pink and loud in the way you never were allowed to be. You name her something beautiful, something yours. And for the first time in years, you feel something like joy, not the loud, public kind, but the private flicker of a candle that no one can blow out. And then more years pass. Your husband dies in a skirmish or an infection or possibly bad judgment on a wet horse. The details vary depending on who's telling the story. You are 16, a widow, but not powerless. You manage his estate. You raise your daughter. You laugh a little, sometimes, when no one's looking. Some say you remarry. Some say you join a convent. Some say you disappear. History is like that. It records the big events and forgets the weather. It remembers your name, but not your voice. The scrolls say you were married at 3, bedded at 12, widowed at 16. They do not say whether you ever danced in the kitchen when no one was watching. They do not say whether you loved the smell of rain, or that you once stitched a tiny donkey into the hem of your gown. But you were there. You lived. You breathed. And now, slow down. Breathe out. Let the torchlight flicker away into quiet stone walls. Let the velvet gowns fade into shadow. Let the rushes on the floor rustle one last time. You've walked through a world with no maps and still found a path. Close your eyes. Little wife. The bells are quiet now. Now, we open your tiny, golden eyes to a soft flicker of lamplight. The smell beeswax with a suspicious undertone of garlic and incense. You're not in a burrow anymore. You're in a handcrafted bronze chamber with tiny slits for air and walls polished smoother than a senator's ego, lined with wool, set on a cedar shelf, and shielded from drafts. This isn't just a rodent cage, this is the Roman dream, or at least a very confusing version of it. You would never think that a glorified hamster ball could be an aristocratic retirement plan. But here you are, snug, slightly plump, and worth more than the sandals of the guy who feeds you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is, because let's be honest, this is not your average bedtime tale. Back to you, the dormouse. Specifically, Glis Glis, a rotund, nocturnal delicacy and the quietest status symbol in the Roman pantry. You blink your beady eyes and twitch your velvet soft nose. You're bred or trapped for the elite. They don't eat you immediately. Oh no. First, they pamper you. Imagine being kidnapped and then offered honey-drenched chestnuts every hour. Like some very polite hostage situation. Your home is a glirarium, a terracotta or bronze jar designed to make you forget you're not free. It's ventilated but dark, narrow but round, like a gym built by someone who's never been to one. You spend your days rotating like a furry cinnamon bun. There's food all around, no light to disturb your natural hibernation instincts. And frankly, no hope. This is ancient Rome's version of meal prep, except you're the entree. Wealthy households measure their luxury not just in marble columns or imported perfumes, but in how many dormice they can keep fattening simultaneously without looking completely ridiculous. Spoiler, they fail at the not looking ridiculous part. There's debate among scholars whether this was a pet situation, gone off the rails, or a purely culinary program. After all, there are mosaic depictions of dormice being doted upon like pets. Then again, there's also Apicius, the Roman cookbook, which includes you on the menu with all the delicacy of a food court receipt. So either you're a beloved squeaky companion, or you're destined to be stuffed with minced pork and pine nuts. And yes, this isn't even weird for the Romans. These are the same people who thought bathing in public with strangers was peak hygiene. So stuffing rodents with almonds, totally normal Tuesday. To be fair, there is an odd logic to it. You're naturally inclined to hibernate when it gets cold, which means you get plump. The Romans, ever the opportunists, thought, why wait for winter when we can simulate it? And thus the rotunda dormitory of dreams or doom. You fall asleep slowly in your jar, belly full of raisins and a sense of impending prestige. Somewhere outside, a servant is arguing whether the olives are ripe enough, and a child is being scolded for trying to poke your container with a stylus. For now, you rest, unaware that your plump little body represents luxury, taste, and a society teetering toward absurdity. You hear your name before you even understand it belongs to you. Glis. It's not exactly a compliment, it means sleeper in Latin. Kind of lazy sounding. Not bold like Leo or noble like Aquila. No, you're named for your most passive trait. your uncanny ability to nap through winter. You'd object if you could, but honestly, they're not wrong. You are a professional level sleeper. If napping were an Olympic sport, you'd be the uncontested Roman champion. But don't get too cozy. Your name isn't a badge, it's a label. You're not just a dormouse. You're the dormouse, the one in the recipe, the one that shows up in the elegant mess of Apicius, Rome's go-to cookbook for the extremely unserious eater. You'd think rodent meat wouldn't exactly scream fine dining, but apparently with enough honey and poppy seeds, anything can scream luxury. You're stuffed with meat or nuts, baked inside an oven that's fueled with olive wood, and sometimes even slathered in fish sauce. Because nothing says decadence like sweetened, fishy rodent. You might think you'd be embarrassed to be eaten. But weirdly, the Romans are the ones with no shame. They display you like a little prize laid out on silver platters, nestled beside quail eggs, olives, and that one smug peacock who keeps getting invited back to parties alive and bedazzled. You're positioned carefully between theatrical indulgence and culinary statement. You're not just food. You're symbolic food. You say something about the host, something unnecessary, impractical, and weirdly expensive. Kind of like a chandelier that leaks. There's an ongoing debate among historians. Was this normal or just something rich people did to make poor people feel worse? The evidence is contradictory. Some sources make you sound like a peasant, treat a grab-and-go protein before refrigerators and Uber Eats. Others treat you like foie gras in a fur coat. So who's right? Probably both. Maybe dormice were the ancient equivalent of champagne, technically available to anyone, but realistically a toy for the elite. Your fate is casually discussed in the kitchen, often while a slave is deboning flamingo tongues or polishing the drinking horns. They've already made decisions about you, which spices, which nuts, which presentation. Some dormice are even flavored with Lasopitium, a rare herb that's now extinct. That's right. The Romans used up an entire species for seasoning. Take that. Parsley. You can hear the sounds of Roman culinary prep mortar and pestle grinding. Fire crackling in the bronze hearth. A whispered argument over whether poppy seeds make dormice look too peasant. Even in death or pre-death, you're controversial, which is kind of impressive for an animal that weighs less than an apple and spends half its life unconscious. And so you twitch in your wool-lined pod, not quite asleep, not quite awake, above you. People are deciding how best to frame you literally. On a plate, your value is rising, not because of your intelligence or personality, but because you're edible and ironically adorable, which, in Roman society, is almost better than being a senator. You wake up shimmering, not metaphorically, actually shimmering. Because, congratulations, you've been gilded, not in spirit, but in actual, fragile sheets of gold, somewhere between hibernation and hunger. Someone decided that what you really needed wasn't more honey-soaked almonds, but the full Midas treatment. Tiny hands, or very patient adult ones, have carefully pressed gold leaf over your small, furry body. It clings like the world's fanciest lint, turning you into a twitching statuette that looks like it escaped from a cursed treasure hoard. The idea is that you will be served as both sculpture and supper, because apparently, in Rome, if you can't decide whether something should be art or food, you just call it both and add precious metal. Historians still argue about what this even means. Were you meant to be eaten in this state, or were you part of some elaborate, edible joke, a centerpiece, a dare, a flex, or were you just proof that someone had more gold than ideas? There's no surviving etiquette manual for how to eat a gilded dormouse. Do you peel? Do you chew through it? Do you mercifully leave it as a decoration and fake enthusiasm while moving it around your plate like an ancient version of refusing Aunt Hilda's meatloaf? We don't know. The gold may have been applied post-mortem, Or, in a truly bizarre twist, while you were still alive and blinking in quiet confusion. Either way, your status has officially reached absurd levels. You are not just a food item, you're now part of a genre. One Roman writer describes dormice served at a feast so decadent that the guests laughed just from seeing them. The joke, likely not for you, the image of tiny rodents, glowing under lamplight and laid beside piles of jewel-toned figs and sauces too sour to identify, becomes its own absurd punchline. It's like being invited to a black tie event and realizing you're the chandelier. Some archaeologists suggest that these golden dormice may have served ritual purposes, votive offerings, perhaps left at shrines for gods who presumably had eclectic snack preferences. Others point to satire. Maybe these gilded creatures were commentary, not cuisine. A literal golden mouse might have said more about the person serving it than the guests eating it. In a world where elite Romans paid to have their ceilings rain rose petals and trained parrots to compliment their guests, you, the sparkling rodent, fit right in. And yet, for all your dazzle, you're still just a dormouse. Somewhere under the gold leaf, you're still fuzzy, with a nose that twitches at fennel and a brain that can't quite comprehend why everything smells faintly of vinegar and ego. You sit there, glowing faintly in the torchlight, waiting to be adored or devoured, possibly both. A child stares at you in awe, unsure whether to pet you or scream. A senator makes a joke about his wife's jewelry looking less valuable. Someone giggles behind a curtain. You, dear listener, are now a conversation piece, a symbol, and depending on how salty the fish sauce is, maybe even a choking hazard. It's getting cold. Not winter's here, let's build a fire cold. But you've been deliberately stored in the Roman equivalent of a vegetable crisper cold. You're groggy, slow and full, which, from the Roman point of view, is ideal. You are entering your natural hibernation cycle, except here. It's not exactly natural. They've engineered it. You're nestled inside your glirarium, a specially designed jar with no windows and limited airflow, making it as close to a 5-star dungeon as terracotta can get. The walls are smooth, and there's no escape. Food is plentiful, fatty, sweet, fragrant. You're eating even when you're not hungry, because your body tells you it's time to prepare for a long nap. The Romans, they're thrilled. They've essentially turned your biology into a slow cooker. Hibernation is your superpower and, ironically, your downfall. Your body temperature drops. Your metabolism slows. You curl up in a chubby little spiral, your tail wrapped over your face like a sleepy emoji. The Romans aren't just feeding you, they're storing you. You're the ancient world's freshest meat locker, self-sustaining, self-preserving, and conveniently drowsy. No butchering required just yet. They've hit snooze on dinner. Historians still argue whether this chilling strategy was a widespread farming method or a bizarre practice limited to estates with more coins than common sense. Evidence is sparse, but some scholars believe dormouse farming may have been more common than previously assumed. Others insist the logistics are ridiculous. After all, keeping multiple jars of sleepy rodents at optimal nap temperature doesn't exactly scale well. Unless, of course, your Rome and scalability never stops anyone from trying something impractical with flair. You dream. Your dreams are soft and shapeless sun-warmed rocks, dry grass underfoot, maybe a fig falling nearby. You do not know that your slumber is both natural and designed. You do not know you are being fattened in your sleep. But your body knows. Each day, your belly gets rounder, your limbs tuck tighter, your tiny heartbeat slows to a near whisper. Outside the jar, slaves check the jars like wine casks. Too warm, add shade. Too dry, mist the storage area. It's an unspoken system of rodent maintenance, equal parts agriculture and culinary foreplay. In larger estates, there are records of dormouse keepers who specialize in this, like rodent sommeliers. The idea of controlling nature to this degree, fattening and freezing at the same time, is peak Roman absurdity. They didn't have refrigerators, so they used biology. They didn't have moral hesitation, so they used charm. And they certainly didn't have subtlety, so they used dormice. You stir in your sleep once. Briefly, maybe it's instinct. Maybe you sense the world is watching you like a pudding with eyes. But you don't wake. You just roll over, slightly, dreaming of warm roots and distant hills, unaware that you are now a luxurious, living time capsule, a culinary promise on hold, an entree on pause. In another room, the host of the next feast is finalizing a guest list and laughing at a joke that ends with, and then the mouse blinked. He's already ordered honey, peppercorns, and decorative fig leaves. Your name isn't on the invitation, but don't worry, you'll be there. You're awake, but only in the way a garnish is awake. That is to say, you're present, but not particularly relevant to the conversation. You are being carried gently and with a little too much ceremony into the marble heart of a Roman dinner party. Not just any dinner party. This one belongs to Domitian, yes. That Domitian, Emperor of Rome, wearer of togas starched into armor, and a man with both a god complex and a suspiciously detailed wine cellar. The table is enormous and shaped like a horseshoe, which conveniently allows everyone to stare at each other while pretending not to. Rich fabrics drape the couches. Perfumed smoke drifts lazily through the air, doing nothing to mask the scent of fermented fish sauce and ambition. The conversation buzzes with political tension and vague compliments. And then, you arrive. You're nestled on a tray so overdone it could double as a bridal tiara. Gold trim, pomegranate seeds, rose petals, and why not tiny bronze figurines reenacting the myth of Orpheus, for the benefit of the one guy at the party who still reads poetry. You are surrounded by other dishes so ornate that they might legally count as performance art flamingo tongues arranged like flower petals, bread dyed green with herbs, and eels braided like hair. But somehow, you are the centerpiece. You lie there, glazed in honey, stuffed with peppered walnuts, and possibly still faintly warm. You are, at once, absurd and fascinating. Several senators pretend to ignore you, but you can see the gleam of interest behind their olive-pickling expressions. A few whisper. One even laughs. You're not just a dish, you're a conversation starter, a metaphor, and quite possibly an insult. Because here's the twist at these elite Roman banquets. Food isn't really about taste, it's about theater. Domitian isn't feeding his guests because he likes them, he's testing them. Watching their reactions, seeing who winces, who dares to try the dormouse, who makes the wrong joke at the wrong time. You, in all your golden, nut-stuffed glory, are a trap with fur. Some say these meals were designed to humiliate, that a particularly twitchy senator once bit into a gilded dormouse and broke a tooth, that someone else refused and found himself mysteriously reassigned to a distant province full of mosquitoes and zero dormice. Historians still argue whether these dishes were sincere delicacies or coded messages. Eat this, and know your place. The banquet drones on. People sip wine so strong it could strip wax off a shield. A poet recites something unintelligible about Neptune's beard. A parrot squawks in Greek. Domitian smiles. Barely. He hasn't touched his food. He's watching. Eventually, one brave soul, likely drunk or politically doomed, reaches for you. You are lifted, admired, and tasted. Reactions vary, some feign delight, others quietly gag behind their goblets. You, poor glistening mascot of imperial excess, continue to lie there as more copies of you emerge from the kitchens. You are no longer just a dormouse. You are performance, social test, edible dare, and maybe even prophecy. The empire is full of tension, and you're being served as a joke that no one can quite laugh at without looking over their shoulder. Before all the pomp, before the honey and gold, Before Domitian turned you into an edible metaphor for creeping tyranny, you were wild, fast, fuzzy, free. You lived in trees and nibbled bark. And then someone with a basket decided your chubby little body looked like dinner. Catching a dormouse isn't easy. You're small, sneaky, and mostly nocturnal. But where there's a Roman obsession, there's a career path. Enter the Glias catcher, a role that straddles the fine line between pest control and rodent sommelier. It's not an official government title yet, but it is an occupation, especially in the rural estates of central Italy, where dormice were first harvested like wiggly, sleepy grapes. It starts in the woods. Oak groves and chestnut forests are your natural kingdom, filled with leaf nests, cozy hollows, and freedom. And then come the children, or the slaves, or the hired specialists with their sacks, bait, and dogged determination. Dormouse trapping was sometimes a family affair, the ancient equivalent of picking apples. Except the apples squeak and try to escape. They lure you with figs, nuts, and a disturbing amount of patience. Some climb trees, reaching into holes with calloused hands, poking and prying. Others use smoke-gentle puffs of pine-scented doom, flushing you from your hiding spots like furry little fugitives. It's both absurd and effective. You run, tumble, hesitate, and then sack. Done. 1 minute you're minding your own acorn business. The next you're in a wicker prison being judged for your plumpness. Some methods are more technical. Clay traps with funnel-shaped entrances, netting strategies, even miniature bait jars. The Romans were surprisingly inventive when it came to subduing rodents. They had no idea what bacteria were, but they could design a mouse snare with the efficiency of IKEA and with about as many confusing parts. Historians still shrug about the balance between trapping and breeding. We know Glyraria existed and that dormice could be raised in captivity. But the rural hunting tradition persisted even when breeding facilities grew. Why maybe wild dormice tasted better? Maybe people just liked the sport of it. Or maybe, just maybe, catching a dormouse gave you that rare Roman feeling of control in a collapsing world filled with economic chaos and awkward emperors. You are bundled with your fellow captives and carted back to the villa. There, you'll be acclimated, which is code for fed, fattened, and gently denied freedom until you forget what stars look like. Welcome to your new life, part pantry, part prison. The irony is that, in some ways, your life just improved. Before, you had predators, snakes, owls, children with questionable motor skills. Now you have warmth, unlimited almonds, and a hand-carved terracotta home. Of course, you'll eventually be seasoned and served. But hey, nobody's perfect. Out in the woods, another family sets more traps, whispering about who caught the biggest one last season. A local boy brags about a dormouse he found asleep in his sandal. And you sit curled in a jar, belly full, dreaming vaguely of leaves and the strange, smoky hands that pulled you from your home. You wouldn't think being a rodent would land you in a moral crisis, but welcome to Rome, where even your chubby existence sparks ethical debates. Yes, you, tiny, sleepy, stuffed you with nuts you've somehow become the poster creature for Roman decadence. Like a furry, cautionary tale with whiskers. It starts with the philosophers, those toga-draped killjoys who think everything is a metaphor for decline. Stoics, moralists, satirists, they all can't stop talking about you. You, the dormouse, have become shorthand for the sort of indulgence that ruins empires. They write things like, "When men gold-plate mice, Rome is lost." Probably not on a pillow, but definitely in some dusty scroll that smells like regret. Juvenal, the sharpest-tongued satirist of them all, practically makes a career out of mocking people who eat dormice. He imagines hosts who stuff them with spices rarer than loyalty, and guests who fake delight while crying inside. You're a recurring punchline in his war against excess, the original first world problem in fur. And while Juvenal might be exaggerating for effect, you know satire always has one toe in reality. The irony philosophers complaining about stuffed dormice were often fed them at parties they couldn't afford to leave. It's like hating reality TV while still watching every episode. They grumbled between bites. "We've fallen so far," they'd say. Crumbs of honeyed rodent still on their tunics. Even Pliny the Elder, Rome's walking encyclopedia and accidental volcano casualty, had opinions about you. He wrote about Gliraria, the dormouse farms, in that half-fascinated, half-horrified tone reserved for things both brilliant and ridiculous. His tone suggested a reluctant admiration for the engineering, and possibly a deep personal confusion about why anyone needed so many sleepy rodents. And it's not just intellectuals. Even household moral codes list dormouse indulgence as a sign you've gone full hedonist, the sort of person who replaces water with wine and throws parties on weekdays. To the upright Roman, a dormouse on your plate wasn't just meat, it was a mirror. One that reflected gluttony, laziness, and the creeping fear that the empire was snacking itself into collapse. Historians still debate how widespread this moral panic really was. But somehow, you've infiltrated the forum, wormed your way into literature, and squeaked your way into the collective Roman imagination. You, a dormouse, are now everywhere. Not physically, let's be honest. You're still mostly in jars, but symbolically you're sprinting laps across scrolls, speeches, and statues. It begins with the poets. Not the brooding romantic types, but the politically sharp ones, Martial, Juvenal, and their ilk. You pop up in their verses as shorthand for soft luxury. He keeps a dormouse in ivory. They'll write, as if that phrase alone conveys a man's entire lifestyle: soft hands. No spine, an unearned fortune. You're a rodent, but also a roast, a red flag, and somehow a vibe. Then come the orators. Cicero's long gone, but his wannabes are still pacing marble halls, practicing their thunderous tones. They name-drop you in arguments about Roman virtue, comparing their opponents to dormice lazy, pampered and ready to be devoured. Were dormice truly everywhere, or just a convenient scapegoat for deeper anxieties? After all, there's limited archaeological evidence for everyday dormouse consumption outside elite circles. Maybe they were rare, maybe they were common, or maybe they were just loud in the cultural imagination, tiny creatures with a massive PR problem. Back in your wool-lined jar, you're oblivious. You're not a symbol, you're just sleepy. But upstairs, at another salon dinner full of political posturing and suspiciously red wine, someone is name-dropping you in a rhetorical tirade. "We gild mice while ignoring the rot in our courts," he cries, dramatically ignoring the gilded mouse in front of him. You've become an idea, a meme before memes, a stand-in for everything the self-righteous love to hate and the powerful love to display. You, dear dormouse, have transcended dinner. Your philosophy on four legs. You weren't supposed to matter this much. You were supposed to be a snack, maybe a gag gift. If someone calls you a senatorial dormouse, it's not a compliment. It means you show up to work, say nothing, snack too much, and sleep through revolution. And it gets weirder. Some households keep dormice alive not to eat, but to show off. Wealthy Romans with a flair for dramatic irony maintain pet dormice in decorative cages, gilded containers, spun silver wheels, even little collars made of twisted bronze wire. You, the edible rodent, now double as living decor. It's peak look what I can afford to not eat behavior. Rumors drift through the alleys like burnt garlic smoke dormice placed in family shrines, mice offered to household gods, mice buried with children or nobles not always eaten first. There's no scholarly consensus on whether these dormice were sacred, symbolic, or just very hard to get rid of. Historians still puzzle over a few tiny skeletons found curled beside coins and amulets. Was it love mockery? Or did someone simply forget to take you out of the jar? And then there's the museum. Whisper the occasional claim that mummified dormice have been discovered in Roman-era tombs, preserved with care, usually reserved for cats in Egypt. No one's found a golden sarcophagus mouse yet, but the theory persists. Perhaps because it's too perfect, the empire that conquered half the known world also embalmed snacks. You are now a political metaphor, a household joke, a luxury pet, and maybe, just maybe, a semi-divine furry relic. That's quite a resume for something that fits in a toga pocket. Meanwhile, out in the streets, vendors sell wooden dormouse toys to bored children. One cheeky merchant offers dormouse-shaped pastries to wealthy ladies on their way to the baths. Someone even claims to have trained a dormouse to do tricks for coins, but it mostly just curls up and naps. Still, the crowd applauds. That too is very Roman. And you? You blink from your newest glirarium, tail curled, belly full. You have no idea you're trending. But rest easy, little sleeper, you've moved beyond dinner. You are now legend. Eventually. The chatter quiets. The bronze platters stop clinking. The fires die down to coals, and even Domitian is just a statue now, literally. And not a very flattering one. Rome changes. People stop gilding their food, or at least start pretending not to. But you, strange little dormouse, don't quite disappear. Somehow, your legacy hibernates like you do, soft, slow, but stubborn, because you weren't just a snack. You were a flex, a satire, a metaphor, a bedtime punchline whispered in marble halls, even after the empire cracks and crumbles under its own ego. The dormouse lingers in memory like the ghost of an overcomplicated dessert. And a few of you, oh yes. The gilded ones are rumored to have outlasted your menu status altogether. Found tucked in burial sites, curled beside coins and weirdly personal hairpins. You make your final debut not as food, but as heirloom. Historians squint at these discoveries, puzzled. Was this a pet kept too long? A joke that became too precious to throw away? Or perhaps a symbol that meant more than even the eater understood? Some suggest the dormouse came to represent the excess of empire itself, a soft-bellied creature trapped in its own comfort, always waiting for a world to change without waking up. Even now, scholars can't agree. Some believe you were just an oddity for bored nobles with too much time and too few hobbies. Others insist your presence in poetry and kitchenware meant something deeper. The truth probably nibbles somewhere in between. What's certain is that for such a tiny creature, your shadow stretches surprisingly far across the dusty road of time. Imagine it a child in the 3rd century, pressing a nose to a clay jar to see if the mouse inside is breathing. A poet, hunched over a wax tablet, muttering about gilded rodents and social collapse. A servant, wiping a silver tray and laughing softly at the absurdity of it all. And now, you, yes. You being remembered in the quiet glow of a screen centuries later, like some miniature monument to ancient ridiculousness. And what a monument it is. You went from wild to wanted, from forest to feast, from food to fable. Your story scurried across kitchens, scrolls, and statues. And now it nestles here, at the end of a very strange bedtime tale. You remind us that even the smallest lives can end up tangled in the grandest empires. That symbolism is often uninvited, and that sometimes history's biggest metaphors come with whiskers and poppy seeds. So now, your tiny feet rest. No more platters, no more jars, just the faint rustle of leaves and a breeze that smells nothing like garlic. You curl, as you always have, into a soft spiral of sleep, only this time. You're not being fattened, or judged, or served. You're simply still, a gilded whisper from a world long gone. Close your eyes, little dormouse. Your empire has fallen, your legend is told, and for once, No one is trying to stuff you with walnuts. S. S.